Let's have an income plan. Let's know where the money's coming from and know the risk that we're under, right? Is it coming from a stable place? Can we take money out without being subject to a huge market risk if the market happens to go down? For most folks, the goal isn't to die with the biggest possible pile of money, right? It's to utilize the resources we have to do what we want and what we intend to do. Most people don't have a bad retirement plan. They just haven't tested it yet.
Hello and welcome to the Relax, It's Retirement podcast with your host, Josh Leonard, where we talk about transitioning into retirement with intent. I'm Wendy McConnell. Well, hello, Josh. I feel like I say hello to you the same way every time. Do I? I do, don't I?
We'll have to check the recording. Not totally sure.
I'm going to say next time I'm going to be like, sup, bud?
Yo.
How's my bro doing?
Yeah, having two young kids, I get to know all the cool lingo. Like bet is like, do you want to go do this? And they'll say bet, and I'm like, what are you betting on? What are you talking about? And it's
that
like,
means yes, right?
So now I've just adopted their communication. So they'll be like, Dad, can you get me breakfast? And I'll be like, bet. And then I'm like, if I talked like this to any other human being, they would be like, what is wrong with this guy?
I'm going to try this on my husband tonight and see what he says.
Yeah. I'll be like, you ready for dinner? Bet. I'll be like, wait, what? Are you okay? But you know, different communication styles to different folks.
Well, I will put a lot of thought and effort into my greeting next time.
Yeah. I mean, you can toss in a skibbity riz too if you really want to be cool.
Oh, I have no clue, but we don't have time to get into it today. We've got a podcast.
Not the subject matter of this podcast episode, Wendy. Today we're talking about retirement stress tests. So
okay.
No skibbity riz Ohio in this one. Okay. Many times we'll meet with folks to kind of review the planning that they've done. In most cases, they're getting pretty close to retirement and they, want a second set of eyes on everything to make sure that they are able to retire. I think these come in kind of a broad range. Sometimes we meet with folks and they've really tried to think through many different aspects of it. Other times it's folks that have just saved as much as they possibly could for as long as they could, and they feel like they're getting to that age. Depending on where they are in the spectrum, that plan could look quite a bit different. And sometimes those plans look good on paper or at a high level, right? Maybe you've thought of a mental benchmark that I need to get to this age and this much money saved in order to retire. But in planning, we want to introduce some pressures to that, right? Traditionally, it used to be, hey, if I saved $1 million, I can retire. I don't know that that's always the case, right? It depends on your scenario. So we want to test that. We also need to factor in things like health and taxes and what we want to happen to the money afterwards. So today we'll walk through a story here covering our 5 pillars of retirement planning and talk through a client story of Jim and Kathy and how, proper planning helped them get a little bit further with their retirement planning and know what to expect too. You ready?
Tell me. I want to hear about them.
So Jim and Kathy, good, nice folks. They came to us a couple years out of retirement. Kathy runs her own small business.
A couple years before retirement, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You said out of retirement. I mean, I knew it would be, you're using that advisor lingo. So I just wanted to clarify.
I appreciate that. Yeah. A couple years away from retirement.
There you go.
I mean, out of retirement could actually mean on the
that
other
retired.
Yes. Too. So let's clarify. Jim and Kathy are happy, healthy, and living. We'll get that back on. None of the issues in their plan were all that extreme, right? They kind of looked through, it seemed like they had enough saved, right? They had put money away in kind of different baskets. They had thought through a lot of elements of it. I think the first one that kind of stood out is they felt like they had enough money. So we took a look at their portfolio. And what we saw is based on how they were allocated, if the market were to take a large drop at the beginning of retirement, that could be a pretty big risk for them, right? They had enough in assets, but they had no proper structure to draw from them. So if the market took a 20% hit in the first couple years, it could impact how much money they had on the backside. They wouldn't have the ability to recover in those assets. So for us, we try to simplify this allocation to properly set up for income, that we kind of need our cash, our income, and our growth bucket. And, you can't see fully here on the screen, but I got buckets here. I got props.
That makes for a good visual.
Yes. When we think through our 3 buckets, we want to think through the purpose of this money. So the first is our cash bucket, right? This is that short-term money. If the car breaks down, the roof starts leaking, whatever short-term pressures we have in retirement, maybe we might need to help a family member out. We want to have that cash available. Generally, it's 3 to 6 months worth of interest or worth of expenses set aside, plus any short-term needs. If we know we're going to be buying a car in 3 months or maybe in the next year, we want to have that money available. Where we see folks get into trouble in retirement is, one, they don't have that bucket, and then it ends up on a credit card, right? And that can get expensive quickly.
That is not a good option.
It's not.
It's an option, but not a good one.
It is. And if we've saved enough for retirement, we also have those choices, right? So we could be putting enough in that bucket. Sometimes people say, oh, well, I have money market or cash equivalents in my 401k, to which I'd say is not quite our cash bucket, because when we take that money out, we have to pay taxes on it, right? So that gives us a little bit more friction in there. So we want to be careful. This needs to be money like in the bank, in a checking, savings, maybe a short-term CD, but really liquid money. Now, the trade-off in that cash bucket is we're not going to earn too much on it, right? The money's liquid, it's available, but we're not going to earn a lot on it. So then beyond that, we need to have an income bucket. We need to think through our income gaps over the next 5 to 10 years. So if we're retiring in 2 years, like Jim and Kathy were when they came to meet with us, we would say, okay, well, for the next 2 years, you have enough earned income. We're not worried about that. To fill up this bucket the rest of the way to cover for 10 years, we need to figure out when our Social Security timing is going to happen, right? When we start taking those Social Security payments. For them, they didn't have a pension, but if we had a pension too, we'd want to consider that in the income bucket. Beyond that, if there's a gap, let's say it's a $3,000 a month gap, and what we need to cover our expenses, we need to figure out how that money is going to come out of this bucket without being subject to a lot of risk, right? So maybe we're looking at dividend paying stocks, bonds, treasuries, annuities, other fixed securities, things that are more stable in value or are producing yield or income that we could potentially spend. Once we have cash and income filled up, then we can still have our growth bucket, right? We can still be taking risk. In this case, for Jim and Kathy, everything was still in the risk bucket. So they had some money in cash, but outside of that, it was all risk. So if the market dropped and they needed to take some money out of those IRAs, or it made sense to take it out of their IRAs, 401ks, we would have to be selling at a loss, right? We weren't going to earn that money back. So we need to think through that before retirement, not after, right? As we're getting closer to retirement, we should start building out these buckets.
Okay.
I think the other big risk that's often overlooked is the tax time bomb, right? This, to us, is in that tax pillar, our tax planning. When we think through retirement planning, there's 3 broad categories. One, we have our taxed never accounts. And these are the fun ones, right? Like a Roth IRA, right? If we take the money out, as long as we follow the rules, we don't have to pay taxes on it. That makes it easy. If we want to go to the International World Pickleball Championship in Brazil, we can take the money out, right? And I don't know if that's where it is.
I was going to say Aruba. I mean, I'm just guessing.
Aruba sounds better, maybe. I don't know. But if we want to take a big, expensive trip, right, we have a place that we can pull money out. Sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have our traditional IRAs and 401ks, where most Americans have saved most of the money. When we take that money out, it's all taxable. So as we take more out, we potentially are paying at a higher rate on those assets. That can cause issues on other pieces of our plan, like our healthcare planning. It can cause us to pay for more in Medicare, It can disqualify us from certain benefits and make more of our Social Security benefits taxable. We've talked about Sue on the podcast before, or someone that might have what we call the good saver tax problem, where they save too much money in those accounts. Jim and Kathy had a version of this, not as strong, but they had saved a little bit too much in those IRAs, where once their RMDs were starting, they were forced to take out more than they actually needed. So we want to structure those early withdrawals in retirement and potentially some conversions to try to level those out, right? So when we went through their plan, we looked at some Roth conversions, some tax-aware withdrawals. So if we're funding some of those early retirement goals, we want to make sure we can get the money out without a high tax friction there. We looked at some charitable strategies. For Jim and Kathy, they give money to their church, as well as a couple local nonprofits that they volunteer at and they're engaged with. So we talked about ways in retirement to give money more tax advantageously. We've talked on the podcast before about QCDs and donor advised funds. There's different ways that we can give money to make sure that it's more tax efficient. Through that tax planning in their portfolio, we were able to save them about $850,000 in federal taxation. Now you might say, okay, well, that sounds like a lot of money. Well, for one, it's over a long period of time. And for two, they've saved a decent amount. For them, their portfolio is about $4 million. So they've saved an ample amount to cover their needs. But in this, if we've done a good job saving, we need to watch out for taxes. There can be a lot of undue tax consequences when we start taking money out of our retirement accounts.
Okay, yeah.
The other risk here that we saw in their planning is owning the same thing in many places, right? So we think that we're diversified, but we own the same stuff in a whole lot of different places, right? So maybe we own Microsoft stock in one account, and then we also own it in a different account. Having that stock in two places, in two different accounts, does not diversify us any further. It's just in two different places, right?
The accounts are diversified.
Yes. I mean, so like a custodian, and this gets into advisor language, a custodian is the place that is holding the actual shares, right? So the two biggest custodians that we typically think of are like Fidelity and Schwab. Diversification is not owning the same mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, and bonds in Fidelity and in Schwab. It gives you no additional protection from the market.
Gotcha.
So we need to look at that. In their case, when we looked at the 401k plans and then their after-tax investments, there was no strategic allocation across those accounts. While they're still working, their taxable accounts were generating dividends and phantom gains from their mutual funds, making them pay more in taxes during their working years, while we owned the growth stocks, the things that weren't turning over a lot, in the IRAs and 401ks. Really, we want to be able to flip that or balance it a little bit better so we're not creating undue tax friction while we're still working.
Okay.
Again, going back to the buckets too, if we think we're going to be taking some of that taxable money out early in retirement too, we need to start unwinding. We need to start making that less risky to fill up that income bucket. This client in particular was working with an advisor that was kind of starting to go down the right path on that. However, they weren't being tax aware enough. They were just selling big bulks of positions to try to make them more conservative. So again, it kept pushing up their taxable income higher and higher. If we can take small strategic steps over time, sometimes we can get to that end goal with a lot less friction.
Okay. Well, that sounds good.
Other thing we need to think about is our health and insurance decisions. Sometimes when we transition onto Medicare, folks find the lowest cost plan and think that that's the best. And we get to learn our ABCs again when we go onto Medicare, right? We have Part A, which is generally our hospital coverage. Part B is our doctors and specialists. We can choose to wrap Part A and B together with Plan C, known as an Advantage plan. We also have Part D, which is our drug plan. That could be included in the Advantage plan, or it could be separate. When we think of that Medicare decision, traditional Medicare, Part A and B, we could add a supplement to help fill in the gap there, right? That would be filling in the gap of what Medicare doesn't cover. We would still need that plan D or the drug plan to help cover those costs. For many folks, the Advantage plan, which wraps it all together, is really appealing because it's a lower monthly cost. If we are taking that, we need to understand where we might be spending that money in the future, right? Like anything in life, Wendy, if it's free or low cost up front, there's some cost in the future, right? We need to be careful there.
Okay, yeah.
Angela and our team, her mom needed some blood transfusions in Florida, and she was in an Advantage plan based in Pennsylvania. It was considered out of network and ended up costing her about $40,000 out of pocket.
For a blood transfusion?
Several blood transfusions.
Okay. I was like, whoa. At first I thought you meant like just taking blood. And then I was like, okay, the transfusion is a little bit different.
Not drawing. Yes, yes. Transfusion. More complicated, but
a little bit, yeah.
We want to watch those out-of-pocket costs, right, Wendy? That is sort of the thing that can derail our retirement. We want to be careful there. So we want to think through that. Thinking back to our tax accounts, if we're still working and we have the ability to save money in an HSA, this is a phenomenal account, right? We can put the money in without paying taxes. The money grows tax deferred, and we can distribute as long as it's for medical expenses where we have medical receipts to use as collateral. That is a tax-free withdrawal. For Jim and Kathy, they had definitely listened to the podcast before, I think, many years ago, because they had maxed out those contributions for years. They had about $90,000 in their HSA account. So for them, if we look at those future medical expenses, we have a pool of money available to us, right?
Right.
We could take a little bit more risk in our planning. If we don't have any money set aside, we're really worried about what tax brackets we're going to go into. We want to make sure our Medicare coverage covers as much as possible. When we think through healthcare planning, Jim and Kathy had another risk they were looking at addressing, and that was long-term care, right? At the end of life, we might have very expensive care if we're in a home or someone needs to come into our home. They were looking and seriously considering purchasing a traditional long-term care policy. One of the things we showed them is, hey, if you don't touch this HSA money and you let it grow for 20 plus years, which is when you might be using that long-term care insurance, right? It could grow into a pool of money that might be able to address most of that risk for you. Traditional long-term care insurance is great. In the state of Pennsylvania, it is guaranteed renewable, which means that they can't cancel your coverage once you get older. The premium can increase, though. So what tends to happen is as your age group, your cohorts get older and more people are claiming from that pool of money, it gets more and more expensive. For my grandmas, they both had traditional long-term care insurance, and the cost over quadrupled before they used it. So really hard to budget for something, Wendy, if we don't know how much it's going to grow over time. If we don't use this insurance, we lose it as well. So we can look at avenues like Jim and Kathy did, where, hey, we're going to invest. We're going to take that $90,000 in the HSA account. We're going to be more aggressive with it, assuming this risk isn't until won't come to fruition until later. Now, for other folks, we might say, well, what if something happens sooner? The other way we can address this risk, we can self-insure, right? We could say, hey, we're just going to spend down some money. Maybe it's not the most tax-efficient way, but if we have enough money saved, we can certainly do that. We want to watch, though, that we are not spending down assets and leaving a spouse without enough to survive.
That would be good.
Yes. Typically, we want to leave our loved ones in good shape. I think another often overlooked risk, or something that we noticed with Jim and Kathy, was beneficiaries. For them, they have 3 kids, 2 of which have their own kids, 2 of which have their own 2 kids. So they have 4 grandkids, 3 kids of their own. When we took a look at their existing accounts, they had each other as their primary beneficiaries. So that's fantastic. If something happened to Jim, the money would go to Kathy and vice versa. After that, they had no contingent beneficiaries listed. Well, what happens then? If we have no contingent beneficiaries listed, Someone has to figure out where the money's supposed to go, right? There is cost to that. It's as easy as filling out a piece of paper. We write who our contingent beneficiaries are on the updated form for that account, and then the money goes to the right place, right? I think the horror story there is if folks get remarried later in life, they don't update their beneficiaries, they pass away, and money goes to the ex-spouse or some unintended party. Certainly we want to update that. For Jim and Kathy, that wasn't the circumstance. They had put each other on as their primary beneficiaries, but if something happened to them, the money would not transfer as efficiently to the kids. Sometimes we also see folks put one kid on, right? Like, hey, Wendy is the most responsible kid in this family, so they're going to inherit all the money, and they're responsible for distributing it to the other two kids.
Oh, that's never a good idea.
It's not. Well, for one, your kids are all going to argue. It's never going to seem fair. And what's going to happen is, well, if Wendy has to take a whole bunch of money out of that IRA to give it to her other two siblings, she's going to have to pay taxes on it, right? We jump up tax brackets quite quickly. So we want to be careful there. We want to make sure that those beneficiaries are properly updated. When talking through this with Jim and Kathy, they understood that. The other layer that we added on is a per stirpes designation, or per the branch of the family. So two of their kids had two kids of their own now. If something were to happen to the kid with kids, they would still want that money to transfer in that branch of the family. So to those two grandkids, or for the benefit of that division of the family. If we had that per stirpes designation, it would do that. Now, in Jim and Kathy's case, if they were on vacation with one of the kids and the plane went down, right? If they didn't have that designation, the assets would just be split between the two remaining children. So we want to think through of what we want to happen and update the forms accordingly. The cool thing about this is this does not take meeting with an estate planning attorney or drawing up an expensive trust or anything. These are just your beneficiary elections on your accounts. This is something as easy as filling out a piece of paper. We want to make sure that we get this stuff updated, right? This is something that we should always do yesterday, but the best next day is today, right? If something happened tomorrow, are things going to work the way you want? We want to make sure everything is lined up properly. You got all that, Wendy?
I do. I mean, I'm familiar. We had a very similar.
You've gone through class now for like 109 episodes.
Well, that's true. But I also know because when my mother-in-law passed and then her mother passed after her, we got her daughter's share of the inheritance, split 3 ways between the 3 children.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know stuff too, Josh.
And then there was no stressful family dynamics there at all, right?
I don't know. I was not part of it. It was not my family.
Fair enough. I think many times when we meet with clients, they'll have a lot of concerns around that legacy planning because they just live through it with their parents or their spouse's parents, right? And they kind of saw firsthand how some of this was difficult. We do want to make it easy for our kids, right? Most of the folks that we work with, they're not looking at, leaving like a Rockefeller level of wealth or, the Carnegie family or anything. If there's something left, they want to make sure it efficiently goes to the kids. But many times that looks like leaving a house, some personal property, bank accounts, like just more normal stuff. Let's make sure everything's titled and efficiently going where we want. When we look at retirement planning, we bring it back to those 5 pillars, right? Let's have an income plan. Let's know where the money's coming from and know the risks that we're under, right? Is it coming from a stable place? Can we take money out without being subject to a huge market risk if the market happens to go down right around our retirement? We need that investment plan, right? So how do we invest to get growth over time and make sure that our risks are balanced? So income, investments. We also need to dig into the tax planning. At the end of the day, if our withdrawals are bumping us up into a higher tax bracket, we might be paying 10, 15% more taxation on those dollars coming in, that's less money we have to actually go and spend. The more efficient we can be in taxes, the more money we get to have. That's a risk that doesn't mean buying more stocks or having less bonds in our portfolio. It's as simple as mitigating those taxes. We need that health plan, right? Those are unpredictable costs that can totally derail things. So assess our insurance options appropriately, know what risks we're under, rather than having a surprise and then making sure everything's in good place with our legacy. If something happens to us, that things transfer how we want. I think for most folks that we meet with, it's not that they have a retirement plan. It's just that they have a coordination problem, right? They've thought through these different pieces kind of in a silo, or they have concerns about long-term care expenses, right? That doesn't have to mean going out and buying insurance. It could be, hey, we have designated funds that are set aside that we could utilize for this. If not, they'll pass on to our kids, and that's okay too. It doesn't have to be that we are retiring and everything goes into the cash bucket now, right? If we start predicting some of our expenses over time, we'll be able to get to that end point without having to totally get rid of any risk in the portfolio, right? If we're going to have a 20 to 30 plus year retirement, we want some growth. We want to make sure that our wealth is still growing over time. So at the end of the day, after meeting with Jim and Kathy, doing some work with them, it wasn't really a concern that, hey, are we going to get a higher return working with you? It's, do we have someone that can bring all these things together, right? To address all of our concerns so that we can feel more alive again. Jim shared with us, hey, the last few years of work have been like really tough, rewarding, but tough. And I feel like I have to put on this face every day to go to work. And, you know, my kids came back to me recently and said, Dad, over the last few years, you haven't been as present and, you know, like you seem stressed out a lot. Are you okay? And he said, you know, I want to feel like alive Jim again, too. He had memories of playing with his kids when they were younger and just totally forgetting about everything else. And for him, retirement represents that, being alive Jim again. So to me, that is the value of the real plan, right? Can we do what's really most important to us? For most folks, the goal isn't to die with the biggest possible pile of money, right? It's to utilize the resources we have to do what we want and what we intend to do, right? So proper planning can help give us the confidence to actually live our life, not just protect against it.
Okay.
What do you think, Wendy? You ready to get retirement ready?
No, I'm not ready.
As we get closer, though, these are important steps, right? To run through that exercise. For us, it's the True Intent Planning System, where we walk through all 5 pillars and address the concerns there and build out the proper plan. If you haven't walked through these questions or addressed the concerns before, there's a good chance that there's a gap in your plan. It's always a good thing to look at before you retire, not waiting until after. The key is to identify them before they're a problem, not after they're a problem. And at the end of the day, Wendy, it's not about just having a plan. It's about having the confidence to live the life you work so hard for.
I like that.
Yeah, that's why we work, right? We don't wait for everyone else to take advantage of us. So we want to be there to live with intent. I got a email from a client earlier this week. She was planning to work till 70. Through our meetings, I've convinced her to retire sooner, and she was going to retire next summer. So we've been like preparing for it. And she goes, actually, you know, my mom's 91. She's still healthy now, but I don't know when that's going to change. And I'd rather spend more time with her. You think I can retire this December? And I already knew that the answer was yes, but seeing that empowerment, if we don't get that time with mom or whatever the situation might be, we're never going to get that back, right? So if we have a plan that allows us to execute, we can get to where we want to be.
Yep.
Wendy, thanks again for joining today for another great discussion around our retirement planning. Tell the Flyers to watch out for the Penguins here in the playoffs.
Ooh, okay.
And remember, retire with intent so you can live your golden years with the happiness and excitement you deserve.